Hey everyone, welcome back to our place. We are super excited to have Dalen Claytor with us today. Dalen has been a very long time friend of mine, but is also a special education teacher in Dekalb County. Went to Georgetown College and is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to IEPs on the teacher side. Our goal is to provide parents some insight as to what's happening with teachers regarding IEPs. He'll hopefully be able to provide you some helpful tips on things that you can do to make the whole process a little bit easier and keep the communication open between the teachers and the parents. So thank you, Dalen, for joining us today.
I'm glad to join you.
So let's talk about IEPs first. So I know a lot of parents understand what they need to be doing on their end as far as helping with writing an IEP, but talk to us about what's happening on your end, what work is involved and all of that kind of stuff.
So on my end, I'm a high school teacher, so we're all given a caseload with around 10 to 20 students, given our teach load as well, depending on what kind of classes you teach. And from there, you identify who all of the students on your caseload are, identify their IEP start and expiration dates, make sure that you plan the meetings within those dates, communicate with the parents on a regular basis, know when to give the progress monitoring to the parents based on their IEP goals, and just scheduling the meetings and adhere to all the services within the IEP.
Okay. So as far as obstacles that you see on the teacher side, obviously you have more than one student, so there's probably a lot on your plate. And talk to me a little bit about the line of communication between teachers and parents. What are some important factors there?
So just to start with the job in itself. So let's say you're an interrelated teacher where you teach inclusive classes. There could be a class size of 30 with 10 students who are students with exceptionalities in IEPs. And you teach 3 of those classes if you're a teacher of a block schedule. So that's 30 different students with IEPs who may not even be on your caseload. And then you'll have the additional 10 to 15 on your caseload outside of your classes who you don't see on a day-to-day basis. Now, when it comes to communication, you have to be able to communicate with the parents in the classes that you teach, those students with IEPs, as well as the parents of the students on your caseload who aren't in your class. So that's around 45 avenues of contact between one teacher and all of the students' parents. So what facilitates that is two-way communication between the teachers and the parents, having the parents easily contacted.
And would you say that's probably one of the biggest obstacles when it comes to IEPs is finding a way to communicate with the parents?
Yes, finding a way and finding the time to do so. Because
so maybe in the beginning, when you're having that first IEP meeting, set like a time or the best form of communication in the beginning, so you're setting yourself up for success for the year.
Yeah. And okay. The whole communication and setting up the meetings, that's a task in itself, because all teachers and members of, so each student with an IEP has a specific team. That's all the teachers, their co-teachers if they're in inclusive classrooms, as well as the counselors. So you have to schedule the meeting at a particular time of day where around 10 people are free for that hour to an hour and a half block in a work day. Yeah. Which can seem it's not impossible, but it's not likely that it happens all the time.
Right. So let's talk about, because we interviewed Allison, who is a IEP attorney in the state of Georgia, and she talked a lot about goal setting, and that's a very important factor in IEPs. And something that we discussed is definitely don't count only on the teachers to come with those goals, that it really needs to be a collaborative effort. And I think when we were talking earlier, you discussed like come with examples of what they're doing at home. So talk a little bit about that.
Yes, particularly with, I say, students prior to high school, younger students, younger adolescents. As a teacher and case manager, you're just getting to know these kids. You can have 10 students with learning disabilities who learn in 10 completely different ways. So no two students are the same. So if the parent can come prepared to a meeting, know how their student learns and have goals, like have their own certain work samples of work that they've done at home, then a teacher can better assess where a student is and properly plan out goals that are within their zones of development.
Okay. And then you talked about coming prepared to the meeting, because that was something Allison also covered. You can request for the IEP and materials and information prior to that meeting, correct?
Yes.
And do you find that a lot of parents know that or are doing that?
A lot of parents, I would say in my experience, about 95% of the parents have no idea as to what goes on during the IEP process. Now, I teach high school, and some of these students have been eligible for special education, which is now exceptional education, since they were in first, second grade, and the parents still have no idea. So a part of my job as a case manager in high school is to educate the parent on the process of the IEP. I provide them with their rights. We have a document with the rights of special education, what they can, what they're entitled to when it comes to their students' IEP. And as teachers, we're required to have the IEP drafted before the actual meeting date. So a parent can request to see the draft of the IEP prior to the meeting date.
And you would encourage that probably, because then everyone's coming more prepared.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage that, because within any IEP, there is a section with parental concerns, and you definitely want to have those concerns prior then to holding the IEP, and you have to have it before the IEP can be finalized anyway.
And what, as far as like time and effort and everything on your end as a teacher, writing an IEP, and when you said, no kid is the same, and so you're working with all of these kids who all learn differently. So what is happening on your end when it comes to writing an IEP?
So the I in IEP stands for individualized. The EP is education plan. So each IEP is its own intricate entity. As a interrelated teacher in high school, like I said, I don't teach. I might teach 10% of the kids on my caseload. So when I'm writing their IEP, I'm reliant on the input of their other teachers and co-teachers. So there has to be solid communication and willingness to provide the input from those teachers. So there's a lot dependent on writing a single IEP. Now, if that doesn't happen, then on my planning period, I had to put boots to ground and go to different classes and physically ask the teachers how the student is doing in those classes, as well as having the parent input to fill out the parental concern section of the IEP.
Okay. And is there anything that a parent could do that could help teachers when writing an IEP for their child?
Well, what a parent could do is be engaged in the child's education. Like if a student is given homework and the parent is actively involved in helping the child do their homework at home, they can provide feedback on a written note card. I've had parents send emails, screenshot emails of what they were able to work on at home to give insight on how life is outside of the classroom. Because some students, they're typically students with IEPs. Learning disability is one of the most common classification under IDEA. Usually their working memory is stronger than their short-term memory. So if we're working on a task in class with repetition, they tend to get it in class. Let's say they're in math class and then they go on to literature, and those tasks that we worked on in math class take a back seat to what they're doing in literature. And then by the time they get home, it's like they've never learned the tasks that we went over in that particular day. So having the parent give their insight on what the child is able to retain when they get home can help a lot.
Okay. And then I do want to, so coming back for a minute to the communication piece, because obviously we have a lot of parents who are either single parents or they're both working. And so, they're working either whether it be 9 to 5 or the night shift or whatever that may be. So when it comes to lines of communications for everyone outside really that stay-at-home parent category, are there, because it can be challenging, are there hours that are kind of set for I can be reached at this time, or will teachers kind of accommodate parents, who aren't able to necessarily meet during those school hours where it's 8 to 3? Do you have any advice for parents that are in that category?
Well, parents in that category, there's ways around it. I would say one, the teacher can try to, if there's a meeting to be had, a teacher can try to schedule the meeting because when the IEP is going to expire. So you can schedule the meeting 2 months in advance.
Okay.
So that the parent, like if they have to take an hour or two away from work, they can give, they have enough time to give prior notice for that. But that is a real challenge. Now, from the teacher's perspective, we have parents who work overnight shift, so they're sleeping during the day, or they work 2 or 3 jobs, so they really don't have much free time. So it's hard to get parents on the phone. So we do folders, we send paperwork, hard copies home with the students for parents to read whenever they have time to. If the student loses it, then we'll just send it again until the parent is able to actually sit down and read whatever notes or IEP notes. We can send those hard copies home, then the parent can sign and just pass notes back and forth.
Okay. So that's good to know, because I think that is a very large population of people that, they have tough working hours or multiple kids or whatever it may be. So we did have some questions submitted. So I'm going to pull out my phone here. And we're going to talk through some of those. So one mom asked, what happens when a modification can't be made can't be followed, due to a teacher shortage? So as a teacher, how do you work with that or handle that?
So that just comes down, you do what you got to do. Sometimes modification, it's hard for modifications to be followed at all times. It might just make a teacher's job harder, but there's always possible. It might not just be able to happen all the time. Let's say a student has an accommodation. So there's a difference between accommodation and modification. Accommodation is how you learn, modification is what you learn. So to accommodate a student, a common accommodation is to have the directions of a test read aloud or a passage of a test read aloud. if there's a teacher, an interrelated teacher who does pull out, so there's a small group testing accommodation. And then on top of that, you have your few who need the test read aloud. What we can do is we have paraprofessionals in the school who we can pull for those types of things. So the teacher can either stay in the classroom and monitor the students who are taking the test in a small group, or the teacher can go out in the hallway or in a separate room and read those accommodations for them. So it's definitely a team effort that has to be, there's a team approach that must be implemented.
So if that's not happening, then do you just kind of maybe have a sit down with the teacher or the administration and see like how everyone can work together to make that happen?
Yeah, so if that's not happening, then that's something that'll be discussed in the IEP meeting. So the parent isn't blindsided. So you make the request, you set the expectations in the IEP meeting, and then from there, everybody will agree as to how the school year is going to go. Now, beyond that point, if it's not happening, then that could fall on the shoulders of the teachers, because the teachers are the ones who agreed to the task. And then if it doesn't happen, then the teachers just needs to follow through with the request.
And you guys are educated, obviously, that these are requirements. And as a teacher, you must follow those requirements.
Yes.
Okay.
If it's agreed in the IEP, it has to be listed in the IEP. Now, if the teacher finds that difficult, then they must say that in the IEP. So whatever's written in the IEP has to be followed. If a teacher says they can only do read alouds on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that's what's going to be written in the IEP. If a student has to take a test on a separate day so that they could do read aloud, then that could be written in the IEP. So IEPs there are many moving parts. No two are the same, and they just individualize it for each student.
And so maybe as a parent, understand that as a teacher, you guys do have a large load of students. And when you are writing the IEP and there are those accommodations and modifications, ask, is your caseload too big? Are you going to be able to do this 5 days a week? Do we need to specify, we're going to do it on Tuesdays and Thursdays? And make sure you're asking those questions so everything is specifically covered.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely.
Okay.
And teachers won't really make any unrealistic recommendations, but it is definitely a good thing for the parents to know what can happen in the IEP and the types of questions to ask in the meeting.
Okay. So on the topic of modification and accommodation, we were asked, how are the accommodations for a student given to a substitute or a teacher who is covering while the main teacher is away?
Okay, so in my county and at my school in particular, we're required to make subfolders. So it could be a binder, folder of any type with dividers. So I teach 3 different periods: first, third, and fourth period. Second period is planning. So the sub will get that binder, and behind each period, you'll have the students with exceptionalities broken down, the cover page of the IEP, and the support page as well. So the sub will know what accommodations or modification each student has. And to facilitate that for a substitute, you won't just leave a substitute blindsided because they're not certified to teach students with exceptionalities. So what I like to do, and other teachers, most teachers who teach students with exceptionalities, is we include the modifications, visual modifications, and their work in those folders as well to ease the job of the substitute.
Okay. And so again, so Dalen works in Dekalb County. So just kind of like all of the IEP information check with your county, check what the policies are for your county, check what the policies are for your state. There are a lot of similarities in IEP federally, so a lot of this could apply to all 50 states, but when in doubt, talk to somebody at the state and talk to somebody at your county just to confirm. So we had another question actually from the same mom. When you talk about accommodations and modifications, is there a place that they could find what accommodations and modifications would be available to them? Or is it something that is just suggested when it comes up?
So that place is actually in the student's IEP. So in my county, well, actually in the state of Georgia, I'm pretty sure it's uniform across the country since it's a federal document. There's a page called the student support page where each classroom, there's classroom accommodations, classroom testing accommodations, and support for school personnel. So a parent is given the entire IEP, but to simplify it, they can simply ask for that student support page. They can ask for those supports to be copied and pasted in a Word document and handed to them, emailed to them, so in a separate file so that they know where to go to see the student supports. And from there, when the annual review of the IEP comes, they can read from those accommodations and ask what each teacher is doing in the compliance of those supports.
Okay, so I think the big thing, because when she asked about it, so it is a student support page. That is the thing that parents should be requesting. I think that a lot gets lost in what the names of the documents are, and so they don't even know how to ask for it. Because the names. So one thing that we had talked about is support for families and support for parents who have children with disabilities. Now, obviously, there isn't a ton out there regarding support, but there are things like Facebook groups. Again, Our Place, you can always come to Our Place to get some information that you need. But as far as teachers' knowledge of those support groups, you would say probably there's a gap there, that not a lot of teachers know about those options.
Oh, yes, there's definitely a gap. And those support groups should be a part of the IEP meeting. So as teachers, like myself, I'm not familiar with a bunch of support groups, but I should be to share those groups with the parents so that they can share them with other parents.
Yeah, so I think when a parent, a lot of stuff is word of mouth. Like we've talked about that a lot. So anytime as a parent you come across a resource that's helpful, that could be helpful to other parents, definitely give that to your child's teacher, because it could be a resource that they send to other parents that could be helpful to all of the parents for their students. So that kind of goes back to like the community line of communication, like you would rather over communicate probably than under communicate.
Yeah, definitely.
So somebody asks if you feel adequately trained in special education process and policies. Now, I think that this is something that's widely discussed because policies change how often?
I would say daily. But
so as of right now, I think parents have an understanding as to when policies change. Is that done at the state level? Is it done at the county level? Is it communicated to teachers? Like, how are you guys currently supposed to find out about policy changes?
So policy can be changed at the state or county level, district level. We typically find out, so we have a district representative who is in charge of all the LTSCs, the lead teachers of special education, the ones who oversee the initial IEPs and evaluations. So it's an umbrella effect, and we're usually the last ones to find out, and probably until the last minute, which puts a strain on us in our workplace. So we'll find out that there's some compliance thing that we have to do or send out, and not until a few days before, and we're all rushing trying to complete this task for whatever reason. But I feel like the information can travel slow at times, but policy changes all the time, and we tend to find out a little later than we like.
Yeah, and I mean, people understand that too. Policies change all the time for these parents, and it's always the last minute to find out. Now, you did say you feel adequately trained on the procedures, and so talk to us a little bit about like the training that you received, if you continue to receive trainings, at least for DeKalb County, what that looks like.
Yes, well, this is all from my perspective, because it depends on who the teacher is. Now, when I first started teaching, all I had to do was take the GACE, the Georgia certification test, to become a teacher on a provisional certificate. Then I had no idea of any of the procedures of an IEP. The demand for teachers is high. They were trying to get warm bodies in the building. So prior to me pursuing my master's in special education, I didn't really have much training on the procedures and policies of IEPs. But in my master's program, I received adequate training in the processes of exceptional education, and I've been able to share that with my colleagues. But if you don't pursue higher education, or if you don't have an actual degree in special education, which they do require you to get after 3 years of a provisional, but in those first 3 years, you're really just going with the flow pretty much.
So is there any advice that you would give to, I mean, I think like, I can tell you, I'm one of 4 siblings, and I had good teachers and I had bad teachers. It's just kind of the way it is. There's going to be good teachers and there's going to be bad teachers. If a parent is in a situation where, they don't feel as if they have the strongest teacher, especially when it comes to meeting the needs of the IEP, is there any advice that you would give to parents to navigate that situation?
Well, parents typically know, like the parents who recognize that typically request for their child to be switched to a different teacher. And that happens multiple times a year. I see students change all the time due to the negative rapport that a student may have with a teacher, or that they feel that a teacher is inadequate in teaching their child or meeting their needs in special education, providing accommodation and things like that. So parents just need to know the power that they have in making those requests.
Okay. And then on the other side of it, where we have, that single parent, or those parents that are working full time, or you said a lot of parents work the night shift, what would be your advice to them? Because obviously they might not be able to give their child as much one-on-one time that is necessary, or be able to sit down and do their homework with them every night. So for those people, what advice would you give them to still be able to have an effective IEP, and to take more advantage of the little time that they do have?
So it's hard to one is typically hard to get in contact with those parents, but as I said before, a teacher can facilitate that by scheduling meetings further in advance so a parent has time to plan. But those students in particular, that falls on us as teachers. That's where our integrity has to come in, our empathy has to come in, is to teach from the heart, is what I like to say with those students. So we had to take care of them while they're with us, while we have them in our control, because we don't know what's going to happen when they get home. So we gotta teach with empathy, teach with care, teach with integrity while they're in the school. We got to control, we can control, and try to communicate with the parents as best as we can.
And is that usually, I mean, you probably find that out at the beginning of the year, phone, email, whatever that may be. So establish in the beginning clear lines of communication. And I mean, I like what you said, know the power that you have. If a parent is with a teacher that's maybe not being as respectful of the fact that they work, or they're a single parent, or they're working the night shift and stuff, then you can request a parent who maybe will, or a teacher who will be a little more empathetic with that.
Definitely.
Well, thank you, Dalen, very much. Parents, hopefully you guys got a better idea as to what's happening on the teacher side. Understand, they have a really big caseload as well. A lot of students. Communicate with your county, communicate with the teacher, and head on over to our place. You can look at the interview from Allison, who is going to provide you some information on the nuts and bolts and kind of elaborate a little bit more on what Dalen was talking about as to what exactly your rights are in an IEP, setting good goals and all of that stuff. Until next time, thanks for listening.